Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again. Hope you're all well and happy. We're going to get back into our very basic Bible study today by looking at chapter 24 of Genesis. And it involves the marriage of Isaac. So let's jump in. It might be a little long one today because this is kind of a long chapter. Maybe a few minutes long, not very. But let's get started. Chapter 24, verse 1. Now Abraham was old and advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. So he's rich. Not only rich with cattle and stuff like that, but rich spiritually. Because we've seen over the last few chapters how he's really grown in his faith in the Lord. Verse 2. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live, but you shall go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. So he's making this oldest of his servants make a pretty solemn vow here. And just the background behind this, back then it was not uncommon to make this kind of vow. And the significance traditionally is that if you break this vow, if you don't do what we agree here, my descendants are going to settle accounts with you. In other words, that's kind of where this type of oath came from. Verse 5. And the servant said to him, suppose the woman will not be willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? It's a good question. What if she doesn't come with me? Verse 6, then Abraham said to him, beware lest you take my son back there. In other words, don't do it. Verse 7, the Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and he will take a wife for my son from there. Basically, Isaac's saying, God is involved in this. He told me to leave my land. He told me to come here. He is going to provide a wife for my son. And so you don't need to worry about that. God is in it. But he says, just to put your mind at ease, verse 8, but if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this my oath. Only do not take my son back there. Whether the woman comes or doesn't, don't take my son back there. Verse 9, so the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master and set out with a variety of good things of his master's in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia to the city of Nahor. This is about 450 miles. This is a long trip. And he's taking a lot of stuff. Not just 10 camels, but all kinds of gifts and things and provisions, because this is going to be a long trip. And there were other people with him. I mean, he's not doing this alone. There are other men with him. Verse 11, and when he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the wall of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. One commentator points out that this is interesting because he didn't go looking for a wife at the places of entertainment and things like that. He went to a place where daily work and activities took place. Verse 12, and he said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. So he's praying to to the God that Abraham has taught him about and told him about. So he's a believer along with Abraham. And so he's praying to the Lord for his help. Verse 13. Behold, I am standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, Please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, Drink, and I will water your camels also, may she be the one whom thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac. And by this I shall know that thou hast shown loving kindness to my master. So he's got a plan, and he's asking the Lord to go along with this to give him assurance of who this woman is going to be. Verse 15, And it came about before he had finished speaking, that behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. Wow. Even before he finished his prayer, God has answered. I want to point out here too that remember back in chapter 22 at the end, we put in our memory bank some names. There were some genealogies there that we don't know why they were brought up. But here we've started to see some of these names, and we're going to see more of them as this chapter goes on. But Rebekah, Bethuel, the son of Milcah, wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, all these names were back in chapter 22. Verse 16. And the girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had had relations with her. And she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her, and he said, Please let me drink a little water from your jar. And she said, Drink, my lord. And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. So this is unfolding just as the servant had asked of the Lord. Verse 19. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all the camels. Well, this servant has to be really excited now because everything is unfolding just as he had asked the Lord to do. Verse 21. Meanwhile, the man, that's the servant, was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. So he's all these things are falling into place, and he's wondering, is this really going to be the one? Verse 22. Then it came about, when the camels had finished drinking, that the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel, and 2 bracelets for her wrist weighing 10 shekels in gold, and said, Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house? So he's all business, and he's going to try to hurry things along here to verify whether this is the woman. Verse 24, And she said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. Again she said to him, We have plenty of both straw and feed and room to lodge in. Then the man bowed low and worshipped the Lord. He sees now that things are working just as he had asked. He couldn't have asked for more. And so he's thanking God in advance that things are going to work out. Verse 27. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers. Then the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. So she's relaying what the servant has told her. So she's excited too. Verse 29. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. Now Laban, we're going to read about further down the road, and we're going to see later on that he's kind of an opportunist, And when he sees the silver and gold and how his sister's been treated, it kind of inspires him to be more courteous as well. Verse 30. And it came about that when he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrists, and when he heard the words of Rebekah his sister saying, "This is what the man said to me," he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. And he said, "Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I have prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So he's kind of gushing with hospitality now that he sees there's some wealth involved. Verse 32, so the man, that is the servant, entered the house. Then Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my business." And he, Laban, says, "Speak on." So he's all business, this servant. He wants to get things settled. He's excited. He's anxious. He wants to forge ahead and get all this settled. You can just imagine the excitement in seeing all of his requests answered by the Lord. Verse 34. So he said, "I am Abraham's servant, and the Lord has greatly blessed my master so that he has become rich. And he has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, and servants and maids, and camels and donkeys. Now Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master in her old age, and he has given him all that he has." Not only has he made him rich, but he has given all of his wealth to his son. Verse 37, "And my master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house and to my relatives, and take a wife for my son." So Abraham knows that if he allows Isaac to marry a Canaanite, that they are probably going to, or could, sway him in his religious beliefs, pressure him to turn to their gods, lead him away from the one true God that Abraham worships. And he's hoping that by sending his servant to his relatives there, that maybe they still have a love, respect for his God, the one true and living God. And that this would be a healthier union as far as Isaac's spiritual growth and maturity. So he's quite clear about this to Laban and his family. Verse 39, "And I said to my master, Suppose the woman does not follow me. And he said to me, The Lord, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you and make the journey successful, and you will take a wife for my son, from my relatives, and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my relatives, and if they do not give her, you will be free from my oath." Might be good to mention here that it was not uncommon then to marry relatives. The prohibition against that didn't come until the time of Moses, when strict guidelines were laid down. But remember, we talked about in earlier chapters that early on, the gene pool, God knew this. Man didn't know this, but God knew this. The gene pool of mankind was pure enough to where intermarriage between close relatives was not a danger. By Moses' time, the gene pool had been contaminated to the point where marriage between close relatives would have put the baby in jeopardy of mutations and things like that. So there was a prohibition. People didn't understand why back then, but now, through science, we understand these things more. But God in his wisdom knew all this even way back then. Verse 42, now he's going to relate all of these details again. And this is not only part of the narrative of what actually happened, but by repeating this, it's God showing us how important these things were. Verse 42, so I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if thou wilt make my journey on which I go successful, behold, I am standing by the spring, and may it be that the maiden who comes out to draw, to whom I say, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and she will say to me, you drink, and I will draw for your camels also, let her be the woman who the Lord has appointed for my master's son. So he's related his plea to the Lord. Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder and went down to the spring and drew. And I said to her, please let me drink. And she quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will water your camels also. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. This had to have quite an impact on the hearers, because this is too complicated to be just coincidence. Verse 47, then I asked her and said, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her wrists. And I bowed low and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. So through all this, God is guiding, God is providentially having these events occur. People are still people, they have choices, but God is able to work behind the scenes, so to speak, to accomplish his perfect will. Verse 49, so now if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, let me know that I may turn to the right or left. All business here. Tell me right up front. Do you understand what I'm saying? Are you going to agree with this or not? If not, then I'm out of here. Verse 50, then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, the matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you bad or good. Boy, this is a good indication that they acknowledge that this is happening through the Lord's will and through his work, just as Abraham had hoped that they would still trust in the Lord that he worshiped, the one true God. Verse 51, behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. And it came about, when Abraham's servant heard their words, that he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. Had to be a very emotional time for the servant. Verse 53, and the servant brought out articles of silver and articles of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. There's no mention of the dad. He probably has passed on by now. Verse 54, then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. When they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. But the brother and her mother said, let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10. Afterwards she may go. Understandably, they wanted to spend some time with their daughter before she left. But we see in verse 56, and he said to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. Again, all business. I want to get this thing done and get back to my master. Verse 57. And they said, we will call the girl and consult with her wishes. Then they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. And so she's agreeing to the whole thing, not only to going, but to going immediately. So she's being submissive to the Lord's will as well. She's very young, by the way, probably only 14 or 15 years old, but she is going voluntarily. She's not hesitating to do the Lord's will. Thus, verse 59, thus they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men. Probably sent her away with several people. Verse 60, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. In other words, we want you to be prosperous, and we want you to prevail over your enemies. Verse 61, then Rebekah arose with her maids, again, maids plural, and they mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. So the time is compressed here, and we're going to see that we skip over the 450-mile trip back, and in verse 62, she's approaching their destination, their final destination. Verse 62, now Isaac had come from going to Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. Custom back then was if a superior was on foot, then you were on foot as well. And she recognized him as a superior, not knowing who he really was. Verse 65, and she said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, he is my master. Then she took her veil and covered herself, which was customary back then as well. Verse 66, and the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. So he repeated this entire story, and it had to thrill Isaac's heart, knowing that God had been involved in all of this. Verse 67, then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now his mother had died several years before, so this is the first time he's been comforted, I suppose. But quite a romance story, quite a story of God's control and providential care and seeing that his will is done. And one commentator, Dr. John Whitcomb, points out that in a sense, Rebekah had very little choice, because when we're confronted with circumstances like these that are clearly in the Lord's control, that clearly can't be just coincidental, it's a no-brainer. There's really only one right choice to be made. We still can make the wrong choice, but when you see things so clearly as she did, with all the events that were told to her by the servant, there was only one choice that she could make in her heart. It's similar to us. When we read God's Word, and I hope this is the case in your life, when we see all the things in the Old Testament that point to Christ coming, Christ coming, Christ coming, there's a Savior. And we see all of the things that occur that can't be just coincidental, that God is working. He's working behind the scenes in spite of what man might do. We saw where Abraham made wrong choices, but God was able to work them out for good. We're going to see more of that in the future in the Old Testament, where Abraham's offspring make poor choices, make the wrong choices. They sin, but God is still able to work behind the scenes and work to have his perfect will come to fruition. When we see that, when we start to see that in the Old Testament, all these facts, all these things mount up, mount up, mount up, in our heart we have to realize there's only one answer. There's only one decision we can make, and that is to trust in and believe in Jesus Christ the Lord, the Savior of the world that God has provided. I hope this has been meaningful to you. It's a real exciting book. I know it's been very basic. We could spend a week just on this one chapter, but I hope it's been meaningful for you. And God bless you. I hope I see you again for the next lesson. Bye-bye.